point, the only way in which a person could reach out to or treat a person with a mental health issue was to really commit him to jail, arrest him and commit him to jail, because of various other processes that were initiated. So I'm just quickly reading 2 lines from this, and then I have just 2 more slides. So this is somewhere in between. It may be a little out of context, but I think being the sort of professions that we are, we'll get a hang of it. Faced with menacing class action lawsuits and mounting public pressure to do something about the wretched conditions in mental hospitals, state legislators were happy to shift the burden of caring for the insane off the states' backs and onto Uncle Sam's assistance programs. Once again, money was driving public policy. Seemingly overnight, states had begun emptying their wards and boarding up mental hospitals. Between 1960 and 1980, the number of patients in state institutions plunged from more than 5 lakh to under 1 lakh. This massive exit was called deinstitutionalization. So what happened to the mentally ill? Tragically, deinstitutionalization turned out to be an unplanned social disaster. In most states, patients were discharged without any effort being made to link them to community services, if in fact they were any. President Kennedy's promise of $3 billion to create a safety net turned out to be a cruel lie. In the coming years, mental health ended up going hungry when the federal pie was gobbled up. Congress never got around to financing community mental health centers. Chronically mentally ill patients, psychotic and bewildered, began appearing on street corners. The few mental health centers that had been built were not equipped to prevent severely disturbed patients. By the late 1980s, the mentally ill started arriving in jails and prisons. By the 1990s, there were so many of them being locked up that a newly coined word began appearing in mental health publications: trans-institutionalization. So what happened there? They transferred the mentally ill from the old state hospitals into jails. It was why the Miami jail's 9th floor existed, and why jails everywhere were now being overrun with psychotic prisoners. The emptying and closing of Dix's state hospitals had created a huge warden system. Simply put, the mentally ill had nowhere else to go. And Miriam and I were chatting earlier, how many people in one of the prisons?
In Texas, 30% of the prisoners have a mental illness.
30%. So that's in just one prison, and that's really a large and sad number.
We don't have that problem, Vandana.
We have in some of the places that we have visited.
We have the reverse problem. That number of persons in our jails, there are many times, numbers of mentally in the jail is many more times than in the mental asylum. Because you don't have number of beds in the mental asylum. You have got number of beds in
You're saying they more?
Yeah.
That's exactly what
many times more.
Yeah, so that's exactly what we said here as
And
well.
sir,
Our jail population is about 4 lakhs all over the country.
No, sir, I'm telling this with the personal experience of having spent some number of days in at least one big crowded jail.
You spent it?
Yeah. Without committing a crime, of course. We are a unique country. I have spent some days in jail, and I can say convincingly that a number of people were either under trial or they have been after trial they are there, or they are simply there, they don't know why they are there. Even that type of people are there.
Okay, so we go back to that. This Justice Prakash gave us colleague, so I'll just quickly finish this. So if we go to rescue option, there is the Mental Health Act, and I think Dr. Anirudh Kala will speak more on it, so I'm not going to touch on it. But according to that, what you need to do, see, in the initial years of the Banyan, till 2001, what we were doing is merely filing an FIR and rescuing the person with the best of intentions, and then reintegrating the person. But what happened from 2002 onwards, like Nimesh mentioned, is that we had the Mental Health Act that came into force, and according to that, we had to first go to a magistrate, have a certification there on the basis of 2 other certificates that we received from the psychiatrist, and then commit the person to an institution for treatment, and then ensure that reintegration was possible. So that really was the process. Should the police come to the picture at all, or can the response just be handled by NGOs? Should the response have again, the police coming in and arresting the person, or have a sort of environment that is similar to that of an arrest, or should we have an ambulance coming in, which usually is not the case. The ambulance never comes in to rescue a person with a mental health issue.
But now it will come. 108 they will come.
Okay, fabulous, fabulous. If we can work that out, it's fabulous. We actually went to EMRI and asked for the 108 to come and meet the needs of these people. But unfortunately, they said that no, well, it's only for physical problems, it's not for psychiatric problems. We did that. We tried everything possible, yeah.
Yeah, they're always scared that they
No, you should not discuss. You should ring up and ask them to come, they will come.
Yeah,
should
that's
not
what I
discuss
Okay,
the jail.
come back to that. So now, shelters and hospitals that we have, once the person is admitted into the shelter, do we have a system of review, or is the person just forgotten in over there? One is the person being forgotten on the streets, but two is also the huge danger of the person being forgotten in the institution. According to the Mental Health Act, again, the magistrate is supposed to review the person in a 90-day period, and if the person is well, then the person ought to be discharged. But that rarely is the case. It's very, very difficult to actually implement this in practice because the huge numbers of people that we cater to, and because the law, this process really doesn't work. Magistrates are really not sensitized too much, and Justice Prabhashri Devan knows that because we had a huge program together where we tried creating a Lok Adalat, and for some reason it sort of fizzled out. Legal services. Do we have adequate legal services? I was very surprised that Nimesh mentioned that a person has access to a legal service and can actually discharge himself or herself, or an interested third party can do that. That hasn't happened in India. And
as a voluntary patient, when I go to a mental hospital, I have no way to come out on my own.
yeah, so that is a huge issue. So what happens if you go in, you remain a long-term voter? And finally, institutions are governed by the NHRC, but unfortunately, when there is a problem, like the problem that we encountered a couple of years ago, there wasn't really a solution, and the NHRC couldn't do anything that was, that prevented the problem from taking place. So that was a huge, huge dilemma for us. So what are the options? On the street, no social, besides no medical care, no hope for the future, abuse and poor quality of life, no social contact. So it's really exclusion. You're not really citizens, you're really invisible. But what is the flip side? If you get into institutions, there is a risk of involuntary commitment. There is a risk. There is involuntary commitment, and there is a risk of your just continuing to remain there long term. So what are the suggestions? A collaboration between social welfare, disability, health department and corporation. Most necessary. I know the corporation is attempting to do several things here, but unfortunately I'm not very comfortable with the roundup that's happening, and large numbers of people are just going in, and there is no sort of accountability. So I'm a little concerned about that. It will be useful if the NGOs stepped into it, and if there's a system of rescue rather than a system of rounding up. And if people went in, so there's accountability and documentation, and there is an exit route, and people just don't end up over there. In terms of people who rescue, anybody and everybody cannot rescue. There has to be a certified training program for people who rescue people with mental illness, like we have with the police. There has to be, whoever goes and rescues a person with a mental health issue, there has to be a certified training program for that. Harsh is going to talk about how there are open shelters, and the whole concept of open shelters is being initiated for homeless people, men, women, children and families. But I think there is a need also to include people with mental health issues, and we've been talking about that. He's going to talk more about that. Corporation clinics, there are 265 of them. Unfortunately, with no psychiatric drugs, like I mentioned yesterday, if we don't want homelessness to exist, psychiatric drugs have to be available. Final slide. Okay, so if we want the society to change, then it's important that media doesn't present people the way that it does, the homeless person with a mental health issue. So towards that, we need a lot of public service campaigns. And I feel that PETA has succeeded in making sure that the rights of the animal, dog, cat, whatever, is really preserved. Unfortunately, as a whole, we aren't really able to do too much, whether it is the rights of a person with a mental health issue or whether it's the rights of a person who's homeless. It's not sufficient for us to just talk about access to care or just talk about prevention of homelessness unless we tie it into regular mental health hospitals. There are certain things that definitely are non-negotiables, and those are what is listed above: dignity, public attitude, no one-way into institutions. You have to make sure there is an exit path, and no tucking away under the carpet, because there's a need definitely to ensure that this issue is tackled. So I think my request to Harsh really as a special commissioner is to see that social action and public policy reflects the needs of this very, very vulnerable group. And if we're talking about a holistic model, then we need to start off with sensitization campaigns that leads to a helpline, so people know whom and what service to access, to make sure that rescue is done in an appropriate way. Look at the Mental Health Act and look at provisions for it to be a lot more sensitive than it is. Look at the concept of open shelters, PPPs, admission, discharge, definitely with a final goal of reintegration, and that should be tied into the regular access to care system that we had discussed yesterday, which is not only access to clinical interventions, but access to social interventions as well. We'll discuss. I have too much to say, but I'm looking at Justice Prabhashri. They will look at the. I know that she had to leave at 10:30. I'll end here, but I think this is a very serious issue, and we need to discuss this in greater detail in the afternoon. Thanks. Okay,